So let's just do this one. Okay. So just read the problem. Okay. So answer the next question using the following information. Let small w is equal to w by p again. So that's a real wage. W is the nominal wage. P is the aggregate price level. The demand for labor is given by dw is equal to 1 minus w. Okay. And supply of labor is given by SW is equal to W. Okay, if N is the employment level, then Fn is the aggregate output. If nominal wage is always such that the labor market clears, then the aggregate supply curve is given by the equation. So can you tell me what will be the aggregate supply curve? Very good. Okay, it is f of half. Is that clear? Is everyone getting this? Okay, so all that you have to do is just if you plot it, this is how the situation looks. Okay, and you'll find that okay, so this is real wage and this is in output. Okay, sorry, this is employment. Okay, and this is SW equal to W. Okay, and this is DW equal to 1 minus W. Okay, so this is 1, this is 1. Okay, this is 0. Okay, so obviously the equilibrium is at half. Okay, just solve this. Okay, and equilibrium real wage will be half, equilibrium employment will be half, and no matter what the price is, equilibrium employment always stays half. So the aggregate supply curve is y equal to f of half. Is that fine? Okay, now the next question is, so just read it. So this is basically the nominal wage is rigid downwards. Okay, what that means is that there is a constraint that the nominal wage cannot be below W naught. Okay, and they have defined equilibrium. Okay, equilibrium in the labor market is the wage that minimizes the absolute value of the difference between demand and supply, subject to the constraint that nominal wage is at least W naught. Okay, so why don't you do this problem and tell me what will be the equilibrium nominal wage given that the price level is P. Yes, it is A. Okay, so let's see how we can do this problem. Well, now notice that we are given the price level P. Okay, so P is given. Okay, and W naught is also given. So basically you want to minimize the absolute value of the difference between demand and supply. Okay, subject to the constraint that W is greater than or equal to W naught. Okay, so this is what you want to solve. Okay, now P is given, W naught is given, but there are two cases for W naught. Okay, one case is that W naught is such that W naught by P is above this point. Okay, so let's call this W naught by P. Okay, so this is one possibility. Is that clear? The other possibility is W naught by P is below this. So that's the second possibility. Okay, this is possibility 1. This is possibility 2. Okay, now when W naught by P, okay, by the way, if there is no constraint like this, can you tell me what is the solution to this problem? So ignore this constraint for the time being. Without this constraint, what is the solution to this problem? Exactly. The solution is W by P is equal to half. So what that means is W is equal to P by 2. So the nominal wage will be P by 2. Is that okay? Right? That's the solution. Yes or no? Yes or no? Okay. Now with this constraint, do you agree I can write this constraint in this way also? W by P is greater than or equal to W naught by P. Yes, I can just put P both sides in the denominator. I can write it like this. Do you agree? Yes. Okay, now you want to minimize the difference between demand and supply subject to the constraint that W by P is greater than or equal to W naught by P. Now, if W naught by P is here, then you have to choose W by P above this, right? I mean, you cannot choose. So basically your constraint is you have to choose W by P in this region. Yes or no? Because W by P must be greater than or equal to W naught by P. Now, can you tell me what value of W by P minimizes the absolute value of the difference between demand and supply, when you have to choose a W by P in this region? So what value of W by P minimizes the absolute value of the difference between demand and supply? What is the absolute value of the difference between demand and supply? It is this, right? This is the difference. So where is this difference minimum? It is exactly at W naught by P, right? So what value of nominal wage will minimize this? It is W naught. Is that okay? So the answer to this problem is W is equal to W naught if, okay, if W naught by P is greater than half. Okay, basically you can also write this as if W naught is greater than P by 2, right? Yes or no? So this is a solution. Yes or no? If W naught is greater than P by 2, then the solution is W naught. Is that clear? Okay. The other possibility is that this is your W naught by P. Okay. Now, where do you think is the solution in this case? So now your constraint is that you have to choose in this region. So which value of W by P minimizes the difference between demand and supply, the absolute value of the difference between demand and supply? Exactly, it is half. So W by P must be half, so W must be P by 2, right? So it is P by 2 if W naught is less than or equal to P by 2. Okay, so if you see, it is W naught if this is bigger than P by 2, it is P by 2 if P by 2 is bigger than this. So you can also write this as max of W naught comma P by 2. Is that clear? Okay, let's do the next one. Okay, again take 2 minutes and do this. So it's the same problem. Now you have to find the equilibrium employment. Okay, same problem. Please note that so in this situation, what do you think will be the employment? Suppose this is a solution, W equal to W naught. So basically we are here. So what do you think will be the employment? This or this? The equilibrium employment. This point or this point? Obviously it is the left point, right? Whenever Exactly, point of the demand curve. The reason is because you cannot force the firm to hire more. I agree, workers are willing to supply more labor. There is excess supply of labor over here, but then you cannot force the firm to hire more. You can also, I mean, you can always put that constraint on the firm that firm cannot reduce the wage below a certain level, but you cannot force the firm to hire more at that wage level. Okay, so basically the equilibrium employment will be given by the minimum of these two, this point and this point, whichever is smaller. Is that clear to everyone? Okay, so in this case, in our case, it will be this point. Okay, so notice that whether you are here or you are here, because if W naught by P is higher than half, then you'll be here. If W naught by P is smaller than half, you'll be here. So what that means is you are always on the demand curve in both these cases. So if you want to figure out what is the equilibrium employment, a quick way to figure that out is, you can take the demand curve. What is the demand curve? 1 minus so W so employment is equal to 1 minus W by P, right? It is 1 minus W by P. So and here W is this, so you just have to divide it by P, and you're going to get 1 minus max of W naught by P comma half. Okay, which is nothing but, so if you multiply, take the minus sign inside, it will become min. And then if you take the 1 inside, you're going to get min of 1 minus W naught by P comma half, because 1 minus half is half. Okay, so that's your option A is the equilibrium employment. Is that clear to everyone? Okay. So what about this one? What is the aggregate supply if half is less than or equal to 1 minus W naught by P? Absolutely, it is f of half, right? Because if half is less than 1 minus W naught by P, then the employment level is basically min of these two, which is half. If the employment level is half, then the aggregate supply is f of half. Is that okay? Okay, now why don't you sketch the aggregate supply curve? Because there is another exam in which the same question is asked, and in which they actually use the graph of aggregate supply curve to actually answer some questions, where you have to actually sketch the aggregate supply curve to answer some questions. So can you tell me how will you sketch the aggregate supply curve here? So take 5 minutes and draw the aggregate supply curve. So remember that aggregate supply curve is the relationship between price and the aggregate output. Okay, you can assume that this production function is increasing and continuous. Okay, you can assume that this production function is increasing and continuous, and you have to sketch the aggregate supply curve. P is given, W naught is given. Okay, P is not given. Okay, P is something that is going to be on the vertical axis. W naught is given, and you have to plot the aggregate supply curve. Okay, so you have to give me the precise intercept. So what is the vertical intercept or the horizontal intercept of the aggregate supply curve? Okay, now notice that when P is W naught, this term is 0, right? So equilibrium employment is 0, okay, when P is equal to W naught. So what you're going to get is that when P is W naught, then the equilibrium output is 0. So I'm assuming F0 is 0. Okay, fine. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so all that you have to do is just have to do this comparison and you'll get it. Okay, so this is comparing 1 minus W naught by P. So if you just do this check, when is this bigger than this, so you're going to get that, so just take it to the other side, you're going to get half is greater than W naught by P. Okay, which means that P is greater than 2W naught, okay, which is P is greater than 2W naught. Okay, so if P is greater than 2W naught, okay, so 2W naught is somewhere here. Okay, so if P is greater than 2W naught, okay, aggregate supply curve is a vertical line, as you just said. Okay, so it's just going to be a vertical line. Okay, and it is going to be upward sloping, you know, from this point to this point. Okay, so I'm assuming continuity of the production function, so you'll get something like this. Okay, and what is this point? Okay, this point is f of half. Okay, and why is this upward sloping here? Because, you know, as P increases, W naught by P goes down, and if W naught by P goes down, 1 minus W naught by P goes up. So basically equilibrium employment increases with price. Okay, and therefore, you know, the equilibrium output increases with price, and therefore it is upward sloping over here. Okay, so that's the graph of you know, aggregate supply curve. So the next question that you can be asked is, you know, what happens if W naught increases? Okay, if there is a one shot increase in W naught, what happens to the aggregate supply curve? Is it going to shift up, down, doesn't shift at all? Yeah, it's going to be an upward shift. Okay, this is something which is very clear from here. Okay, it is going to be an upward shift. Is that clear to everyone? It's going to shift like this if W naught goes up. Okay, so you should be able to answer questions like these. Okay, I mean, they ask a lot of questions like these. Where will the curve shift? You know, once you have solved this, then they'll be asking, you know, some comparative static questions like this. Is that clear? Yeah, so yeah, so you can actually, you know, think of this as a situation where capital is fixed. Okay, and you know, it's already plugged in. Okay, so whatever that value is already plugged in, and that's how you got the labor demand. And you know, and that's basically labor demand, you know, is something that has you know, the capital in it already. Is that fine? Okay. Okay, any questions? Okay, now let me ask you two more questions based on this. Okay, so these were the questions that were asked in the other exam, you know, where this question was asked. Okay, so suppose aggregate demand curve is downward sloping. Okay, this is aggregate demand curve. So basically the question that was asked in that year, you know, it wasn't just these three questions. There were actually 7 or 8 questions. So they had aggregate demand curve. You know, first you have to derive the aggregate demand curve from ISLM equation. So that was actually first 2 questions, and then there were 3 questions like this, and there were 2 more questions, you know, following these 3 questions, where they were asking you, you know, what happens if government expenditure goes up? You know, what happens to the aggregate output if government expenditure goes up? What happens to the aggregate what happens to the price level if aggregate you know, if government expenditure goes up? You know, and what happens to the price level if money supply goes up? You know, what happens to the aggregate output if money supply goes up? You know, so those were the kind of questions that were there. Okay, so the options were actually not very straightforward. Okay, so if you haven't been able to plot this aggregate supply curve, then you would have got confused in, you know, those options. Let me give you 2 of those options that were confusing. Okay, so the other options were obviously, you know, I mean, something that you can easily rule them out, but 2 options were confusing. But once you know the shape, then there is no confusion. Okay, once you know that this is how the aggregate supply curve look, there'll be no confusion. Okay, so let me tell you those 2 options, and you'll have to tell me the right answer. Okay, so option A is, so suppose the question is, suppose G increases. Okay, G increases. Okay, then what happens? Okay, so the options were equilibrium output does not go down, and equilibrium price goes up. Okay, option B was equilibrium output goes up and equilibrium price also goes up. Okay, now you were given this aggregate supply curve, but you don't know the location of aggregate demand curve. Okay, so aggregate demand, the only thing that you know about the aggregate demand curve is that it was downward sloping. So what do you think is the right option? It is actually option A. Okay, the reason is because if aggregate demand curve is here, okay, and G increases, then aggregate demand curve will shift up. Okay, in that case both are going up. Okay, but if aggregate demand curve is here in the beginning, and then government expenditure goes up, then the aggregate demand curve will shift up in this way, and you can see that equilibrium output doesn't go up. Okay, I mean it stays fixed but it doesn't go up, right? Okay, so one thing is for sure, that equilibrium output will never go down. Okay, that is for sure, no matter what happens. If you are here and you move from here to here, equilibrium output goes up. If you are here to here, then it doesn't go down. Okay, so one thing is for sure, that it doesn't go down, and we know for sure equilibrium price will go up, and that's why it is option A. And that is why it is important to get this shape right. If you don't get the shape right, you'll have trouble in doing this problem. Is that clear to everyone? Okay, so I mean, these are the kind of questions that you you can see. So it's both basically demand supply. I mean, so all these micro fundamentals are going to be used even in the macro. Okay, so I would say, just practice some of these problems now. I think you should be able to do them with all the stuff that we have done today. I think there'll be no problem in handling the questions that are asked in the DSC and ISI entrance exams. Okay.